me, I want to go to sleep every night knowing that any product that goes out of the door is safe and effective, and that I would, as a patient, take it, and or anybody that I have within the company or within my family would be safe taking this. So that to me is, most important. And when I got into medicine, they make you swear that you'll do no harm, right? That's one of the tenets that you swear to. And to me, all of these factors are honoring that commitment that I made many years ago to do no harm.
When you're working with us, we're very transparent about all the pieces of the process, because we're proud of every piece of that process, and we're sure and we're confident. And I think that's one of the big things. Welcome everybody. We're here for another video with myself and Jason. To open this one, we're going to start by telling you a little bit about ourselves, and then we're going to dive into our exciting topic all about donor screening and the manufacturing standards all around FMT. So I'll start. My name is Dr. Shaina Cahill. I have a PhD in neuroscience, and I am the Director of Operations and Medical Affairs at Novel Biome. And my big focus is always on educating the people about gut health and the usefulness of FMT, so that we can really understand the research and kind of try to educate people on this kind of changing and dynamic field. And I'll let you introduce yourself, Jason.
Sure. Jason Klop. I'm the founder and CEO of Novel Biome. My background is as a naturopathic doctor, although I no longer see patients and I'm not actively licensed. I got really passionate about FMT many years ago when it was clear there was a real patient need and there was a lack of access, and that the ways that people were accessing FMT were often unsafe and had a lot of problems with it that could really create problems for their health and their health outcomes. So that's what led us to where we are today. Of course, there was a long journey in getting there, but a big part of that is what we're going to talk about today, which comes down to the manufacturing and the donor screening, which is ultimately what FMT safety is all about.
Perfect. So in this video, we're really going to dive into these two major topics, which kind of are the pinnacles of FMT safety and efficacy. So the first one is donor screening, and this is kind of makes sense in terms of how the product is made. So we start with screening the donors. And so if you think in terms of donor screening, similarly to blood screening, or if you are doing like sperm donations and things like that, and egg donations, all of those include first screening the donor, because it's going to be something that's human derived. And that means that everything inside you can contribute to, what you're donating. And so donor screening for FMT is split up into 4 stages, the way that I look at it. So we first do initial health and wellness screening, and this is normally questionnaire based. And this dives into not only the donor's health and wellness in terms of, their day-to-day, but it also goes into the potential of having conditions. And this looks into their family history as well. And we screen for things that could be carried through the gut microbiome. So things we know about like obesity are screened, but as well, neuropsychiatric and neurodevelopmental conditions. So like depression, anxiety, autism spectrum disorder, Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, any of those in the immediate family history are screened out. As well, we look into things like sleeping issues and things like that, because that all plays a role. One of the more interesting things that we do at Novel Biome is we also don't just ask about diet, we actually ask them to record their diet so we can get a look into what they're eating and how that's feeding into the gut, as well as what types of exercise that the person, the donor, does. So all of this is to give us the best snapshot of what that gut microbiome is going to look like.
And to quickly pile onto that a second, the reason for screening all of these different factors is because each one of those is an indication that there's dis-ease or an imbalance within the gut microbiome. So if someone has, say, for example, obesity, in many cases, it's related to imbalance within the gut microbiome. Of course, there's a lot of other factors at play, but just based on the research, we know that there's a correlation, potentially causation between gut microbiome imbalance and the condition. And the same is true for depression, neurological diseases, early onset of a lot of these types of diseases. And so it's really important for us to help screen these donors to ensure any of these risks that we know are in some way connected or correlated with imbalance in the gut microbiome are screened out. It may not be a direct cause for that patient, but we don't want to put the recipient who's receiving the transplant at any kind of increased risk for developing something that could potentially be transmitted through the gut microbiome. And so we want to give them the best, most healthiest transplant. And that's what this screening is all about, is just ensuring that any factors that we know potentially contribute to the development of a disease are actively screened out way before a donor even gets to the point of donating.
That's awesome. And then from this, not a lot of people make it through this initial screening. Some of the research, says up to 80% of people won't make it past just this initial questionnaire. So that's not even actually looking at anything going on inside the body through blood or anything. This is just asking questions. Most people will not make it past this initial screening. Once we finish this initial screening, go ahead.
Yeah, and it's funny because when we talk with clinicians, hospitals, clinic groups, research groups, they're always asking, like, where are you finding these donors? Because the standards that we have are really quite high. And of course, we're going to get more into them. But it is a really challenging aspect of what we do. But on the flip side, I feel in addition to all of the other things, of course, the manufacturing, which we're going to talk about, like there's so many pieces that are important. But this is really a foundational piece that allows us to feel comfortable in knowing that the product that we're releasing into the market is safe. And so it's one of our most important roles here at Novel Biome is to make sure that the donor screening is to the highest possible standards. And there's international standards that are published, and we try to even go above and beyond those. Because to me, yes, if it's safe, great, but if it's not effective, not great. So it has to be both safe and effective. And a donor who has no risks, but also really healthy gut microbiome is going to play into a role into the effectiveness. So that's the things that are really important as part of this context.
Perfect. And then once we get this initial screening done, then we get into the blood and stool screening. There are hundreds of markers that are screened for. And so what we're looking for here is we're looking for in the blood, a lot of the blood measures are looking for the indicativeness of health from, just the overall like liver function and things like that are screened. And then when we get into the stool, we're also screening for parasites, viruses, antibiotic-resistant bacteria to ensure that everything that's in the system, getting kind of a deeper look into what's going on within the body as well.
Right. And so, we can kind of think of this as a funnel, right? Like it starts really wide. We're putting this message out there to as many people as possible who may have their interest piqued in being a stool donor. And we move them through this big funnel and we slowly narrow it down where most people don't even get through the first step. They're removed because, let's just say, for example, they weren't vaginally born. Well, that would exclude someone from being a donor. Or they have a history of overuse of antibiotics. Even though they might have a lot of other health attributes, that would be indicative for us that they are not an ideal donor, and we would remove them. And then the next steps are coming down once they go through some of these exhaustive questionnaires, is finding out, like, is there anything potentially infectious or pathogenic that could be passed on to a potential recipient who in many cases is in a vulnerable state. In the context of C. diff, these people are really ill. And if this isn't handled properly, there could be consequences. And so this is something where the net is wide, but then the funnel just slowly moves them down. And we want to ensure there's nothing in their stool or in their blood that can be considered pathogenic and ultimately infectious and harmful to the recipient of the transplant.
And then once we do this screening, one of the interesting things about this is that every time someone donates stool, they're going to do a shortened version of that initial questionnaire to ensure there's been nothing that's changed between that initial questionnaire or any donation that they do. And so this is a safeguard just to make sure things like, do you have flu-like symptoms, to, have you partaken in anything risky? And we have these questions to make sure that we have touch points to ensure that, the product that we're going to be building from the stool donation, there isn't anything going on with the donor. And then on top of that, every 3 months, we redo all the blood and stool screening. So we have regular questionnaires that are occurring, as well as every 3 months, we do the blood and stool screening again. And something interesting about this process is basically in that 3 months, everything is quarantined. So we have a test at the beginning of the quarantine period and a test at the end of the quarantine period. And if all of those tests lined up to say that everything is clear, then the product made within that 3-month period is then released. So we're getting as much information from the donors as we can to try to increase the safety of the product.
Agreed.
So
checks and more checks. It's all about, and that's about what GMP or good manufacturing practices are about as well, is making sure that there's a whole system in place and that there's checks and double checks so that there's no risk of missing something. There's lots of validation along the way to make sure that it's not just one person who's in charge of reviewing and ensuring that everything that we say we do, we do.
Yeah. And in this process, there's a review from a medical doctor throughout this process. So these people are getting physical exams done to make sure, and they're having a touch point with a doctor. And a medical professional reviews all of these documents to make sure that, everything is being met and is getting signed off by someone as well. So there's a lot within this donor screening process. There's a lot of safeguards in place to ensure that, it's what's the word I'm looking for? You're kind of a step away from then making the decision if this is or isn't good. And so that's why we have, an external medical professional that kind of looks at all of this stuff that works with us. And so the donor screening process is really thorough, and it is something that there's a movement towards kind of standardizing this process because we want everybody everywhere to kind of be screening in a similar process to ensure that every product that's going to market is safe. And so that's something that's still in the works, and we're seeing kind of more and more groups and countries come out with the beginnings of their kind of screening preferences, or what must be screened for and passed before a stool donor would be considered viable.
Right. And just to add to that, like in Canada, for example, where we are, Health Canada is licensing us as part of a drug establishment license that we have. And they have certain standards as far as what donor screening should look like that we need to comply with. And we actually go above and beyond in many of the measures. The FDA in the US has their own standards on donor screening. And if there's any issues, for example, several years ago, they were requiring testing for certain antibiotic resistance because there was an issue where a patient got a product from a donor who had a bug that was resistant to antibiotics. And so that's, of course, problematic. And so the list goes on. Every country has their own standards. And it's our goal to try to, where possible, meet or exceed any of the standards that do exist. But then within industry is making publications and putting them out there that are setting some kind of international standard as far as like what we should be looking for in screening donors and testing donors, and what the types of different acceptance criteria are or should be.
And I think the closer we get to standardization, the better, because we want to make sure that, if you're getting or working with donors from another place or working with a different regulatory body, if everybody's on the same page and everyone knows, which things we need to be screened for, which ones are dangerous or which one can be transferred to a recipient, I think consistency across that board makes it both easier, but I think it increases the safety because, every group you're working with, it's the same entry to kind of meet the bar for donors or for product. So I think it's something we'll see more as time goes on. I think the field of gut health and FMT is growing, and I think with that we'll get more kind of consistency and kind of buy-in across the board, which is just exciting. And so once we have a donor and the donor is going to give us stool, we've got to make product, and that's where we get into manufacturing. And I think the first big thing that people need to get is that when we're making product, we're making it in like pharmaceutical level manufacturing. So it's, in a clean room, or it's in a specific space that has low levels of kind of anything that could contaminate the product. That's kind of what a clean room does. And then everything is standardized. So all of our machinery is standardized. All of our protocols are standardized. Everything is double checked. So we have, one of the interesting parts of pharmaceutical-based manufacturing, which is called GMP, or good manufacturing practices, is that everything has two hands. There's two sets of eyes on everything. And part of this is to reduce mistakes, but it's also to ensure that, when you say, we add this amount of this chemical or this solution in here, that everyone goes, yeah, that's definitely it. That is how much. So then every product is the same every time we make it. And so it heightens the, level of safety, but as well as the level of consistency, because you have two sets of eyes on everything and everyone's kind of double checking. And that goes from the product, the actual manufacturing of the product, but as well as all of the quality. So all the quality testing, and that's a big part of GMP, is the kind of quality testing or quality assurance that exists kind of throughout the process. For us, when stool comes in, our quality team looks at it and goes, yep, this meets all the requirements we need, doesn't have anything in it or look any way that would not be suitable for product. And then the production team produces the product. And throughout that process, we have quality checks, but as well at the end, the product is checked just like any other kind of pharmaceutical you would buy. But as well, we retain samples to ensure that we have something for retesting, or we can check it over time to ensure the product is staying consistent and the bacteria levels are consistent throughout the period we say it is. And so just like any standard pharmaceutical you would buy, all of these measures exist for us. And that's one of the big kind of steps that we've taken, is getting these licenses and getting certified for GMP, so we can say and do all of these things so that everyone, can feel more comfortable using the product.
Right. And that's, the donor screening is where you have a big part of the safety and the efficacy, right? We've already discussed that. But the other part is the manufacturing, right? Being in an environment that's clean, that's tested to make sure it's clean. So we've got ongoing environmental studies that we're doing, which is a part of the microbiology lab that we have here at Novel Biome. And each room is tested, the water is tested, the solutions that go into the product are tested. The product, when it's finished manufacturing, is tested. No products are, manufactured in the same room unless there's a cleaning that happens between them. The cleaning is validated to make sure that it's actually clean. And there's just step on step on step. And so I think a lot of times people, when they think of FMT, they just think, oh, it's, poop, and they put it in a pill, or they put it in an enema that is just then applied. And I mean, historically, I think the very early iterations of FMT were that way. But the way that it is today, it's really not that way. It's a drug that, there's a lot of processing that happens to remove any of the impurities or things that don't have a lot of value. For example, in stool, there is a lot of fiber, and there's no need to have that in the end product. And so we're really concentrating for the microbiome, and it's really a microbiome therapeutic more than it is a fecal microbiota transplant, although that's how it's mostly understood and still referenced in the research. And so there's a lot of steps that happen beyond these safety protocols that we're discussing to purify the product, to really concentrate for the aspects of the gut microbiome that we know at this stage play a role in the resolution of the different illnesses that are being treated. And so within the manufacturing, it's again kind of like a funnel, right? We start with a large amount of product, and it's filtered down and purified to the point where you end up with a product, in the case of capsules, for example, that looks no different than a probiotic. In fact, it looks like a probiotic, and in many events it is. It just happens to represent the whole healthy microbiome of an extremely healthy donor who's gone through exhaustive screening. And a probiotic, on the other hand, represents a few strains of bacteria, doesn't engraft, and doesn't have near the same capacity to create rapid change within the gut microbiome. So quite an exciting process. I mean, it's almost a bit like Charlie's Chocolate Factory, right? Where there's a lot of moving parts and there's different people involved, but each of these steps is tested, validated, there's plenty of people looking at each one, whether it be from donor screening all the way to receiving the product in the lab. Everything is a paper trail, so that if, God forbid, there is some incident where there's a patient who has a negative response, we as a company can go back and trace everything back and ensure nothing was missed, everything was tested. We have product on hand from that same product that was sold to the clinic or hospital or physician, who we can go back and test and say, okay, is there anything that was missed? We can go back, test it. Okay, there was nothing here. So there's potentially it came from some other source that wasn't directly from the FMT. And so, yeah, it's a lot of checks and balances. It's in some respects, it almost feels in some ways a little bit like overkill. But just to have that peace of mind when you're a prescribing physician or you're the patient receiving the product, that it goes through all of these different steps, makes you feel a lot more comfortable about using it and prescribing it to a patient who's oftentimes in a vulnerable condition, in a vulnerable state. So yeah, it's for me, I'm very thrilled to be involved in the manufacturing. It's such an exciting place to be. And just to know that we have all of these pieces in place gives us the peace of mind to know that, hey, when we talk to someone about the product, we feel very comfortable and confident in the standards that we meet. And we know with a lot of authority that this is going to be safe and it's very likely to be effective, given all of the background work that we've done to develop the products and to build out the lab and to hire the team that we have in place to do all of the testing and everything that we do. So, yeah.
Yeah, and that groundwork is exhaustive is not a large enough word, because it starts with like the people that we hire, the level that we expect. So both our production and our quality managers have master's degrees in their field. The level in which that we would bring someone onto the team is quite high. Outside of that, the space that we're working in is it's not cheap. It's a good way to start, because a clean room is not something every building has, but as well as having that dedicated space that we know everything in there is clean. There's not people just walking around. You couldn't just come to our offices and walk into the lab space. All of that is secured. And then the equipment that we use, the amount of checks and balances from both external and internal parties to make sure those machines are working to the level that they need to. And then our standard operating procedures. And these are kind of like really detailed instructions on everything. And I mean everything from how to write one of the documents. We have a document on how to write the documents, to how you wash your hands, what you would wear, to then every piece of the puzzle that goes into actually making the product. And when we talk about the SOPs related to products, we have, I think, 10 or 11 that are just on getting a product from the beginning to in a package. And then we have, I think, close to 100 SOPs that are these standardized procedures that go into making our products, and everything running from, how files, what room the files live in, and how long we keep them for, and where dates go on papers. It's very standardized, but that ensures that there's a consistency, and there's never going to be a time where we have to pull a paper and we go, I wonder what this is, because it's got, 7 numbers on it, and it ties back to a set of instructions. And so these underlying features that exist within manufacturing, which isn't what you see. I think we talk a lot about donor screening. I think people understand that because it's coming from a person and they understand the final product, but to get there, there's so much that goes into it and so much time that goes into creating a product that we know can be consistent and that only contains what's necessary, is something that is a feat that I will always assume is not appreciated enough, because I can talk to our, production and quality staff, and the things that they see and the things that the pieces, how the puzzle goes together for them is extremely impressive, because they really do. They see it at both a large level and then all of the little pieces as well. So they're both building the puzzle and seeing what it looks like at the end. So it's they're a very impressive bench. And I think that's something to think about when you're working in this area. It's not just all of the machinery, it's not just the donors, but it's also the people that are doing it are really important. And then they need to also meet some great standards. And all of that is part of GMP as well. I think it's one of the first spaces you think about is like our resumes are part of GMP, and our background, because that shows that these people that are touching product meet the level that is required. So it's like a deep background into every little thing, but it's really important.
It really is. And one of the things actually of all of the things that you mentioned is that you didn't really highlight is actually, most of what we do is within the lab, right? The product, the manufacturing, a lot of the testing is within the lab, but we do rely on third parties, for example, for some testing, for supplying us with the solutions, supplying us with the bottles that the capsules go into, or that the enemas go into, or the capsules themselves. So anything that we order we have to validate that the customer who's selling that to us is also agreeing to the standards that we have. And so we're able to backtrack and make sure, okay, they have a GMP standard. And that's a big commitment on their part as well, because we have to do, quality assessments of their work. In some cases, it's literally they're taking us through their lab, and we're getting a video tour of their space, and we're randomly checking specific documents to make sure that they're to the standard that are acceptable to us. So there's a lot of checks and balances, of course, within the lab, but then anything that comes into the lab that is used as part of production or quality is also double checked and validated. And we keep, for example, certain empty capsules. We keep those on hand to represent any product that we're using. Empty bottles. I mean, everything is available so that if there was some issue, you could trace it back exactly to the product, to the supplier, and then they could pull up. We, of course, keep track of all of the certificate of analysis, and we validate aspects of every certificate of analysis that we receive. For example, just randomly, like if they say a product is a certain pH and it shows it on their certificate of analysis, we don't just assume that their certificate of analysis is acceptable. We do our own testing before we can actually release that product into use within our facility. So there are, yes, as you pointed out, umpteen different tests and standards that we're ensuring we're meeting. And again, this is as exhausting as it can be to be involved in this space. It's not more exhausting than it is important. It's really, really critical to ensure that this treatment is safe and safe and effective. And these two pieces of donor screening and manufacturing, which encapsulates all of these different things we've been talking about, really gives us that impression. And for me, I want to go to sleep every night knowing that any product that goes out of the door is safe and effective, and that I would, as a patient, take it, and or anybody that I have within the company or within my family would be safe taking this. So that to me is, most important. When I got into medicine, they make you swear that you'll do no harm, right? That's one of the tenets that you swear to. And to me, all of these factors are honoring that commitment that I made many years ago to do no harm. But beyond do no harm, it's how do we help impact and get as many patients that need the product. So, hey, if you're a healthcare provider and you've watched us to this point, and you're interested in learning more, reach out, check out our website, amazing resources. We've got an ebook. Hopefully we can link that here. You can take a look at that covers some of these aspects. And any other points you think we should cover, Shaina?
I think the big one is that having GMP puts us in that same, we're in the same ball field, I guess. I'm terrible at sports analogies. But as a standard pharmaceutical, I mean, that's the level that has to be met. We have to meet that regularly. And then when you're working with us, we're very transparent about all the pieces of the process, because we're proud of every piece of that process, and we're sure and we're confident. And I think that's one of the big things. The other thing is, if you saw the beginning of this and we're really into the idea of donor screening, and you want to learn more about becoming a donor, I will also link the website for all of the information about becoming a donor as well, if it's something that interests you or you want to learn more about that. And then, as for always, if you are interested and want to dive into more about anything we talked about, you can go to our website, because ranging from just the information on all across all the pages on the website, we also have links to all of our blogs that go into detail. And we have a number of blogs that talk about the importance of donor screening and manufacturing, because it's something we're really passionate about, but it's very close and near and dear to my heart, because we do a lot of research into that to get a full understanding, to make sure, we're up with everybody else. And if you ever have any questions about anything, you can always reach out to us in the comments, or you can send us an email. And we're always willing to talk about all of this stuff, literally probably all day long, because we do talk a lot about it ourselves anyways. And I think our next video, would be really cool to talk about the concept of super donors, because we've talked about donor screening, we've talked about understanding the donors, and something that we see a lot, or that comes up a lot, is the concept of a super donor. And I think that would be a cool, almost like a myth to debunk, because I think maybe it's a misunderstanding of what maybe super donor should actually mean.
That's a great point. Just a quick anecdote on that to cue up our next video is that I recently had a call with a physician, and she was saying, well, are your donors coming from other countries where we know their microbiome is much healthier? For example, the Hadza tribe in Africa have been studied as having like a really superior microbiome. And so maybe we'll talk about why they could, in some context, be a super donor, but would potentially be harmful to the average Westerner. So with that, it was great sharing with you again this conversation, and I look forward to the next educational session.
Perfect. Thanks, everybody.